Go live. Hello. I think we are about to go live. This is pretty exciting. Hi everyone, welcome back to The Origin of Life. I am David Guillot and this is our interactive show. I welcome people to let me know where they are anywhere in the world, and especially if you have any questions. I'll be looking for people to, in the future, call in, whether it's by telephone or by text. Okay, that's not good. And hopefully I can follow, every week there's new pieces of technology that's going to help me kind of follow along. So hopefully I can follow the chat with my phone. And today's main topic is the fact that this cat last week ended up going on the console and started fidgeting with the numbers. So the evolution this week is to put this box over it, and that'll be a good place to start for us today. So from each week to week, there's an evolution to this channel, much like there's an evolution to, let's say, the car, or even living things from tiny things or very primitive types of states to always more efficient, more effective, always going into a direction where, and she just stepped on the keyboard. Kitty cat. And so since I was young, I was looking for, what is the formula for this? Why is it that an evolution, our very actions from day to day, over here, our very actions from day to day, they seem to make things more and more efficient all the time, whether it's the layout of your kitchen, as I point out in my book, The Symphony of Entropy, available at Amazon, or your morning commute. So how efficient do you go from your home to where you work, and why do we seem to always take the same route? And how are all of these things that I'm talking about, all these complex systems, related? And so for the longest time, I did not have an answer to this. And we're going to get into how and why these things happen, which delves into also how and why we are here. And I just turned on some more lights. There are so many working systems in here. So nobody's joining us yet, and that's just fine, because this is practice for me, for my TED Talk, for my future, maybe a one-man play, maybe a Netflix special. So I really need to get my things in order to do a good show. First thing I'm going to show today is I set it up so that I can have a super screen right next to us over here. And we're going to introduce to you our man, Jeremy England. So what this guy is, he's a real life professor, PhD, and as you see, I like to call him the Michael Jordan of our optimally dissipative configuration. He actually came up with dissipative adaptation, and he said a thing in the Quanta magazine in 2014 that life should be as unsurprising as rocks rolling down a hill. And that really got me to thinking, what do we mean by that? Because it seems to me that life would be going exactly against entropy. So entropy would be everything going from order to disorder. And so how do complex systems arise? So let's walk around the shop and see if we can... Whoa. darn it, it got me again. So that was supposed to stop before the noise because that probably blew your eardrums out. I've also got some mouse traps here. Where's the camera? Playing with the camera. Some mouse traps, and we'll get to those later. Let's go to the fire pit. And let's see if anybody has joined us. Now, if these nice people have any questions, we can't hear you. Something went wrong. Uh-oh, I'm watching. We can hear you now. Okay. So I think that's because I had the atomizer was on and I turned off the volume. But it's nice to know we can communicate. Hello, Ted Bremer. I think he was my first ever friend on this application. And so today's topic is how do we get order from disorder? And here's our fire. And I know what I did there. So many working parts to this thing. Okay, hello everybody. We've got quite the fire here. Hopefully the cat doesn't come over on it. And so how do we get order from disorder? So isn't that kind of counterintuitive? I thought we learned early in school that things always go from order to disorder. And so how do we get human beings, how do we get all these complex systems out there? And this is where we're going to get back to, and I'll check the messages here, to our main man, Mr. Jeremy England. And so he's a real professor, and he made some discoveries, and he's the Michael Jordan of our, in my estimation, our generation, because he's a real respected physicist, and he comes up with real formulas, and I can't believe that this didn't make actually the front page news. It made front page news in my world, but not in that he can actually, through physics, explain how we got here. And so he's still working on it, but I think I'll run with my own theories and things like that. And by the way, we are here located in the same, I'll show you, this is the old schoolhouse that I live in. And you might have noticed behind me there is a big dinosaur. And on this channel you can watch how I built it. I've got a whole series of how I used regular 3D printers to build all the different parts. And so if you're interested in that, and I see a little kitty cat's about to join us here. And so there's a whole series. People sometimes ask, how come I built it? How did it get here? And I can actually relate how that got here to us with the original dinosaurs going from disorder to order. And so let's go to the board and start talking maybe about some of our theories.
Galileo was a mathematician, physicist, philosopher, and astronomer.
So I wrote the book, Optimally Dissipative Configuration, The Symphony of Entropy.
Galileo was the one who really
and it's all about how we can use thermodynamics to explain how and why we're here, and are we alone in the universe?
Probably more than anyone
so one
else,
of the original
Galileo
old school
really
questions
that
that was asked of me when I was younger is,
Galileo
okay, let's
was
say we
born
built
in
a
Pisa, Italy, in
747
1564.
airliner, a very
He was
complex
educated in a
structure,
Jesuit monastery
and so
before
somebody
he
would
studied
say,
medicine at the
okay, what if you had
University
all of the
Pisa?
millions of parts
Galileo
of
first
an
gained
airliner
fame when he
randomly
discovered what
laid
is
out
now
and a
called the
tornado
law
went
of the
through it?
pendulum.
One
What are
day in
the odds
cathedral,
that
he was watching
that
the
would
lamps
come
that
to
were
us?
hanging from the ceiling
Oh, I think I know.
and saw them swaying back and forth, and started thinking about the nature of a pendulum.
He found that the
Off. Okay. And so we've got this, all these parts of the 747, and how is a tornado going to put them together? And obviously the answer is no. So the analogy is, well, if that's not going to happen, then how can us, being all intricate, made of trillions and trillions of cells, how does it come together randomly if it's not from this question mark over here, which we might call God? I mean, obviously that's the answer, that it's some overpowering, some great force of the universe put us together, and we call that God. for me, I still wanted to know a little bit more. Like, does that mean that we're no longer talking about physics? Are we talking about divine intervention? Or is there a thermodynamics way to explain some of these things? And this is where we get back to our guy, Jeremy England, who is also wrote a book that I'm reading right now. And he comes up with adaptive dissipation. And the idea there is that when he says it's like a ball rolling down a hill, like what does that mean? Because it seems like if the order is going against entropy, then it's rolling up the hill. And the key to that is the fact that just like over there in the atomizer, everything congregated towards a potential of energy. So if you think about the human evolution with all the fuel that's down in the ground, and how every time there was any living thing or human on the planet, we always went to the resources, the wood, the food, and we use those up, and then we end up creating all these magnificent structures. So what does that have to do with the universe creating us on this planet? And so it's the same exact idea, is that on the molecular level, if there's any kind of potential energy, which is provided by the sun, so if there's a heat source, or if we go down at the bottom of the ocean, we've got all these alkaline vents that we're about to look at from our friend Sean Carroll. And he explains to us that even though it's not simple for that energy to be released, over millions of years, the atoms and molecules get together and do exactly that. So let's see if we can go to the holodeck. Whew, we're on a mountain now over here, and it's windy. And let's try...
Energy transforms from useful to useless in the cause of keeping organisms like us alive. In fact, life itself may have arisen because of entropy. The early Earth had pockets of low entropy conditions full of useful energy, like warm alkaline vents on the ocean floor. But there may have been no simple chemical reaction that could take advantage of that energy, use up its usefulness, and allow the entropy to increase. There were, however, more complicated chains of reactions that could do the job. In just the right circumstances, an appropriate network of chemical reactions might find a way to sustain itself by tapping into the useful energy in its environment. Some networks might have become embedded in molecular membranes, the precursors of cell walls, and broken away from their point of origin, becoming the first living organisms. Maybe that's how life began, a complex combination of chemical reactions that figured out how to tap into otherwise unavailable useful energy. Story about why stars shine. Hydrogen nuclei have a ton of useful, low-entropy nuclear energy to release, if you can get them to fuse together into helium. But there's a big barrier to getting that to happen. Fusion is hard, and yet, the cores of stars do the job marvelously. So stars, like life, also survive because of the increase of entropy throughout the universe. Our sun takes a low-entropy fuel source, hydrogen nuclei, and converts it into higher entropy energy, photons of visible light. Life takes that higher entropy energy as a fuel source and converts it into even higher entropy energy, photons of infrared light. In a very real sense, the purpose of life is to continue the mission of the stars.
Well, anyway, this is on YouTube, and I recommend it. This is Sean Carroll. So in a very simplistic way, he explains to us how the thought is that the life originated at the bottom of the ocean, and that there was a lot of potential energy, but no life around. And that over time, just like we saw in the atomizer, that things would gravitate towards a system whereby that energy could be released. And that is the key to understanding how the humans and life in general end up normally coming to a planet if it's possible over time, because it's releasing more energy, creating more entropy than without it. And so that's the key. And we're going to go back to the board because I've got a diagram for you. So here we've got one Earth and another Earth. Here's the atmosphere. And here we've got humans. And here we have no life. And the idea here is that, I'm going to go over there, is that the benefit or the downhill going of life being here happens if it can, because on the planet that has life, that has human beings, the more entropy or chaos is created because we actually release ordered things such as the energy of the sun or the food around us or the fuel to actually heat. We literally heat up the planet, which is a controversial topic right now because we don't want to do that over time, but it's perfectly natural. And that's the downward force as to why we're here. That's the key to understanding why life should be on a planet versus not. And so I'm very passionate about introducing this to people who may not know or may not understand. And I've also created a simple formula here for S equals entropy, and that's ODC, optimally dissipative configuration. Over here is the first law of thermodynamics, and that says that we can't create or destroy energy. And the second law says that everything goes from order to disorder. So the order would be the Big Bang being a very close-knit explosion going out towards everything we see today in disorder. But when it can, it creates pockets of order naturally, because having those is more entropic, more dissipative than not having them. And now we're going to go back to the... So you may have heard what a nebula is. It's not just the name of my cat. It's also, if we look at what this is, some paints inside some water, and I think it's very beautiful, but also you can start to see how it kind of looks like our nebulae, and our nebulae is actually where we as we're about to get an explanation from NASA here as to why nebulae are here and what they create.
How does a nebula make
Let's see
stars?
if this works.
Well, nebulae are made of very spread out dust particles and gases, mostly hydrogen and helium. Gravity begins to pull clumps of dust and gas together inside the nebula. Then, as those clumps grow larger, their gravity gets stronger and stronger. Eventually, a clump of dust and gas gets so big that it collapses from its own gravity. This collapse causes the material at the center of the cloud to heat up, causing the beginning of a star.
Okay, so now we're back at some paints showing how they look like actual nebulae. And so we're going to stop this. So we talked last week about how we have a form of life that's not DNA based. And so the way humans tend to think is that because we are so complex and unique, that life is unique to the universe. And the key to understanding that is the fact that while we are unique and never be able to be reproduced again, a life form is actually a very complex structure that helps dissipate energy, much like if we see in this fire right here, this is an energy source, and each flame that we see here is never going to be able to be reproduced the same way again, and yet the fire exists. So this would be like an analogy of how much life there is in the universe and how other lives might might be formed that have nothing to do with DNA or us. And so it should open up our minds as to what other life forms could be, and the fact that indeed we are alone if we think that life has to look like us. But if we say that, well, a complex structure that can look back on itself, maybe that's not DNA based, of course that would be a life form also, but not DNA based, because the idea there is that DNA is such an organized structure that it could only be made, if it was made on this planet, unless it came from outer space, but we don't have proof of that right now. So another analogy that I have for us is with, let's say we think of clouds up in the sky, beautiful clouds, and we can pause it. And so we would say, wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful structure. And indeed, clouds aren't uncommon. And yet that configuration of a cloud will never be reproduced again. And that's a similar analogy of how life occurs and how unique it is, and yet at the same time there's many different ways that it can be configured. So we have different, and then as well, here's a fire analogy where we've got this beautiful fire so the fire isn't uncommon, but if we pause on that very configuration right there, we can even forward a frame by frame, those individual configurations will never be reproduced again. And so that would be the analogy for life and how unique we are and how that occurs. Next, we're going to go up to the mezzanine and see if that system works. We're going to go upstairs, check in on the chat. So I often speak about Galileo, and I call this the Galileo corner because it's got a little telescope here. And as I talk about Galileo, let's go ahead and bring up. So this is our man Galileo, and he came around about a few hundred years ago. And at that time, we didn't even know that there was like a solar system or a sun, or the fact that we figured the sun rotates around the Earth because that's all we could see back then. We look on the horizon and we see this big yellow ball going across, and that's the only conclusion we could have come up with, and that was part of the belief systems and religions back then. So what happens is that this guy here, and he's not the only one with a telescope, discovers for real that the solar system is actually made up of a sun and many planets, and that the Earth is actually rotating around the sun. And that was not accepted at all. That was heresy. He was put on house arrest, this guy Galileo. And so a good thought experiment would be today, if somebody came to us and we thought the sun revolved around the Earth, and somebody told us differently, how would we feel about that? Would we be open-minded? Would we say, and well, the response was that back then is that, no, we don't even know what you're talking about. We don't have a telescope. Why are you trying to upset the apple cart? And that's similarly what's happening, where today we have real answers as to how and why we are here and how we got created, but many oftentimes that actually goes against the current belief system. And so our biggest obstacle, actually, if we're interested in knowing how and why we are here and are we alone, would be our own belief systems or ways of thinking that, similarly to how we thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, similarly, us as a life form are not the center of the universe, because there are hundreds of billions of stars out there, and there's no reason why those different planets around those stars wouldn't have similar conditions that we have today. And today we have a real physical way to come up with these answers and definitions. Let's go back to our wall and see if we can make the atomizer work again. Again, we are looking for people in the future. If you have any questions, you can actually call in or telephone. And here I'm checking the live stream. And so this big mess that we see here represents, like on the head of a pin, you would have millions and millions of these molecules and atoms. And so imagine this times the whole surface of the planet, from the atmosphere down to the bottom of the ocean. So that's almost an infinite amount of molecules and atoms doing their thing when this vibrates. And if it has anything to do, it will do it. So for example, if it has, in this case, magnets, it will get attracted to it. But if there's also an energy source, something to make explode or dissipate, it will do that. And so that's why I built this. Every time we do this, it seems random, but it's actually, every time it's following a very precise configuration, much like our commute to work. So we don't take random routes to work, right? Especially, I remember the morning rhythm is very precious, so we don't want to squander it. And so now we're going to make this work again. Maybe I'll make that mousetrap work too. Let's try that. Oops, I think I didn't shut that off. Okay, so again, the point of that experiment was to show that it's not often and it's not easy for organized structures to form. But if you see right here, we've got this configuration here that I've never seen before, and it's probably useless. It's probably, every time something occurs, it's going to be useless. But once in a while, what happens is that something will hit something that has some kind of a potential, like this mousetrap here, and let it go. And so what happens to that, I'm still building this, when that goes off, for example, now you've got a whole potential of things occurring, including kickstarting something else, or having some kind of a positive feedback type of a loop where more and more things occur, and little by little, the end result is that we would have complex structures and systems arise, much like, and let's see if I can do this here, much like if we look at, let's say, a hurricane. So this is a complex structure that we see all the time, and if we pause this, we can see that, of course, we don't call it a living thing because it doesn't have DNA, but these things produce themselves, they reproduce. Similarly, if we think about a nebula, for example, no, not this nebula, this was my kitty cat when she was younger. I did that on purpose. But more so, if we look at these beautiful paint structures like this one, if we pause that, you see how they're not just randomly going out. If I do one frame at a time, they're very specific, or very. See, we got a swirl going on over there. And so those are structures, and the reason those structures occur is because that facilitates the entropy of the system. I could watch these all day. Paint, another one here. Okay. So another So another thought experiment is this is a cityscape, right? And you've got the cars, and this is actually blood vessels going on in our own bodies. And you see how things are moving in a very ordered way, almost like traffic. And this is a city again. And so since I was young, I saw this from an airplane, and I thought it's uncanny, the similarity between these little vehicles we see there in the blood vessels and what we see overhead in the city. So what is the common intelligence there, right? If we can call it an intelligence, did humans build cities around blood vessels? I don't think so. But what they did need is an efficient way to carry supplies and nutrients through humans and cars to homes, and in this case, in this example, we see in cells to the cities, and I think that's fascinating. So here we're kind of starting to touch that intelligence of the universe, seeing that it's not an accident, and that while we can have belief systems and each of us can have a different interpretation, let's say, of what a God or a higher power is, but we can also meld all of that into, as we head to the fire, it's actually cold in here, we can actually bring that into our own lives, and with physics and spirituality all melded together, and maybe not have to fight over our belief systems anymore, because when belief systems and religions were first, when we came up with them, and there were thousands of them, it's always the most successful at reproducing and fighting that won out the other religions. And so a lot of wars occur because of that. And we still have these types of wars going on today. And so today I hope that in the not too near future we can see that the specifics of our belief systems are kind of arbitrary, because we all know that other people have different interpretations of this, but now that we can also incorporate science into how and why we're here and are we alone, that we can agree that, yes, we understand that our specific stories behind our belief systems are just that, and we don't have to fight over them anymore. And I think most humans on the planet can relate to that. Well, look who decides to be a nice kitty now. I don't want to leave anymore. So what else can we talk about? Let's see if the people have any more questions for us, Nebula. Okay, I do have a question from Ted Bremer. He says, how might changes in environmental entropy have driven evolutionary adaptations in early life forms? Thank you so much for that question. I'll ask it again. How might changes in environmental entropy have driven evolutionary adaptations in early life forms? Whew, that's a nice big question. And we're going to say that, as I talk about in my book, the Something of Entropy, available on Amazon, that indeed, when we try to duplicate or figure out how exactly humans came to be, or life in general, there is a holistic element to it that relates to the environment. And in fact, so the environment and all the molecules around it had to be working in conjunction, as well as all the rays coming in from the universe and the sun, to have that perfect storm for a system to emerge whatever complex structure occurred. This is why I like to talk about the environment. And on the wall over there, actually, let's see if I can point out to the wall. Let's go back to the desk, Kitty. Yeah. Oh, she doesn't want to move. I'm not going to move. I have things like the water cycle, acid rain, volcanic eruptions. And the idea is that if we can get away from thinking that life has to be DNA-based and look like a little critter that's swimming in a pond, then we can actually start looking at other more simple complex structures like hurricanes and tornadoes and weather systems, and even the water cycle, snowflakes, things that we see commonly. Fire is a very good one. The clouds in the sky, how all of those things form, they come and go. They're quite common, but never exactly the same. And if we can relate to those things back to ourselves, we can start to see how we're working with the universe. We're part of the universe, as opposed to, for the longest time, I had this sense of duality where I know I'm here in the universe, and yet I don't feel like I quite belong, or that or that, let's say, maybe I have a belief system that has certain stories, and when I get down to it, they don't really make sense, but that's the only theory that I have. And so with this optimally dissipative configuration, and a lot of scientists currently working around the planet to find real answers as to how and why we're here, and are we alone, that we can actually come together and not fight about each one of our stories, and maybe insisting that our story is correct, even though we know that there's a lot more stories out there that aren't like ours, that those people believe in theirs just as much. So we're gonna head back to the desk, because kitty cat's being a kitty cat. Okay, kitty, come on. And we're gonna wrap it up. If there's any more questions, I would answer them, but it looks like we had a successful show. It's still going. There might have been some mistakes that I don't know about, and so I'll work on that for next time also. And until then, thank you for joining me, and we will see you next time on The Origin of Life. And let me know if you can contact me if you'd like to ask a question in person next time. If not, we will see you next time on The Origin of Life. Bye.